Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
So this time, we're digging into a really interesting source. You shared a YouTube conversation between Peter Thiel and Jordan B. Peterson.
That's right. And their main idea, the one that really catches your attention, is this notion that progress, well, specifically progress in the physical world, has really slowed down.
Yeah, slowed significantly since, the mid-20th century?
Exactly, since around the 60s or 70s.
And our mission, as always, is to kind of pull out the key arguments they're making for why this might have happened, look at the reasons they float, and even touch on some of the bigger cultural or philosophical ideas tied into it.
Okay, so where should we start? The core observation, I guess.
Let's do that. It's this contrast they set up, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. The heart of it is this split between progress in bits, the digital information world, and what they see as stagnation, or at least a major slowdown in the world of atoms.
The material world.
So the physical stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Since the mid-century mark.
Right. And Thiel gives some, pretty vivid examples, doesn't he?
He does. Transportation is a big one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He talks about that incredible acceleration in the early 20th century. You go from horses to cars to planes.
Even supersonic flight with Concorde for a while.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But where's that kind of game-changing leap in moving physical things around now?
Good question. And he brings up other areas, too, like cancer research.
Yeah, saying we're still kind of wrestling with basics decades later, despite lots of effort.
It makes you stop and think, Look around at the tangible world. Does that feeling of slower physical progress, does it ring true based on what you see?
It's a compelling observation, which naturally leads to the why. Why might this have happened?
Okay, so Thiel offers a few potential reasons. One that really struck me was what he termed apocalyptic fear.
Ah, right, the nuclear angle.
Precisely. The idea that developing things like nuclear weapons created this deep, maybe even subconscious fear about where science could lead.
And that fear might have made society lean towards stability, wanting things to stay the same rather than risk dangerous changes.
That seems to be the suggestion, a kind of collective recoil from potentially world-ending technology.
It's a heavy thought. He also connects it to a cultural shift, inwards.
Yeah, the shift to inner space. He points out that around the same time this slowdown supposedly starts, you see the rise of things like yoga, meditation.
Even interest in psychedelic drugs, exploring consciousness.
Right. As if the focus shifted from conquering the external world, like the moon landing, to exploring the internal one.
That Apollo versus Woodstock contrast he uses is quite stark, isn't it?
It really is. And he broadens this idea of turning inward to include what he calls an escape into abstraction.
Which covers?
Well, it's partly that psychological focus, but also the explosion of the digital world, the internet, video games.
Okay, so exploring virtual spaces instead of physical ones.
Perhaps because it felt safer, or just more appealing, less messy than dealing with the complexities and potential dangers of the physical world. He sort of ties this shift away from material concerns towards more cultural or identity-focused issues.
And then there's the more mundane but possibly crucial factor, bureaucracy.
Can't forget that one. Thiel definitely touches on how regulations, legal frameworks, they ramped up.
And while often necessary for safety or ethics,
they might have also created more obstacles, more friction, slowing down innovation in the physical sciences, more red tape.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But he also brings up something more controversial, maybe, about ideas within science itself.
Yes, the idea of taboo subjects, or maybe more accurately, questions you're not supposed to ask.
Like questioning established dogmas.
Exactly. He uses the example of Professor Bob Laughlin, a Nobel laureate.
Okay.
Laughlin, after winning the Nobel Prize, felt he could speak more freely and criticized how science funding often favors very incremental work.
Right, I remember this part. Especially in fields like high-temperature superconductivity.
Yeah. And Thiel highlights Laughlin's experience of facing pushback, even defunding, for questioning if progress in certain areas had stalled or become too incremental.
So the implication is, if even asking the question about stagnation gets you shut down,
then maybe there is something to the question. It suggests a potential resistance to fundamental challenges within the scientific community itself.
it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are there areas where certain big questions just feel off limits? Could that be holding things back?
It's definitely a provocative thought that certain assumptions might be hindering progress because they're just not up for debate.
Which brings us back to that cultural shift idea. Apollo versus Woodstock, 1969. That symbolism is powerful.
It really crystallizes that potential pivot point. Outward technological ambition right next to inward cultural experiential focus,
And Thiel draws a line between traditional Marxism
which was all about material conditions, economics, objective reality.
and what he calls cultural Marxism, focusing much more on the inner world, identity, language, culture.
Right, he argues this shift in focus, this cultural reorientation, happened around the same time and might have played a role in diverting energy and resources away from big physical projects.
So a shift from collective material goals to more individual, maybe intangible concerns.
That seems to be the argument. Potentially changing where society puts its focus, its money, its brightest minds.
Okay, so we've got fear, inward focus, abstraction, bureaucracy, maybe even scientific taboos. It feels like a complex web.
Oh, definitely. And Thiel himself says asking why for big societal shifts often leads to multiple overlapping answers. It's likely overdetermined, as he puts it.
But he does throw out a few more possibilities, right? Like risk aversion?
Yeah, a general increase in societal risk aversion,
Yeah.
maybe linked to that apocalyptic fear, maybe other things. He also mentions increased regulation again in this context.
And connecting back to the weapons aspect.
He suggests that maybe the whole optimistic, forward-driving Baconian science project, the idea of science for human progress, kind of hit a wall or at least a major speed bump at Los Alamos with the atomic bomb.
The sheer danger became undeniable.
Right, and that danger got internalized, so maybe the digital world seemed like a safer playground, initially at least. Less potential for, accidentally blowing things up.
It's a compelling narrative. But it's important to stress, they aren't saying progress stopped, are they?
No, absolutely not. The digital revolution is the massive counterexample. Progress in bits has been astronomical.
So it's a shift in where progress is happening, or at least where it's most visible and rapid.
Exactly. And maybe progress in some areas is even too fast or too scary for some people. Plus, it's just hard to compare progress across totally different fields now, isn't it? Everything's so specialized.
That's true. How do you weigh a new algorithm against, say, a marginal improvement in engine efficiency?
And Thiel adds that crucial point. Even with all the tech progress, particularly digital, it hasn't necessarily meant broad economic uplift for younger generations in places like the US.
Which challenges that old assumption. Tech progress, better life for everyone.
Right. It forces you to ask, well, what is progress, really? How do you measure it? What benchmarks matter most to you, the listener?
That's a key question. And it leads them into tougher territory. Philosophy, even religion.
Yeah, they start digging into the historical roots, pointing out that early science often happened in monasteries, early universities.
Institutions deeply embedded in Christian thought.
Uh-huh. Thiel suggests this connection wasn't just about, say, a belief in an orderly universe created by God, but maybe also about a specific Christian understanding of what it means to be human, anthropology, not just metaphysics.
Interesting. So the very foundation might be tied to a particular view of humanity's place and purpose.
That's the idea being explored, and more fundamentally, the argument that science itself relies on assumptions you can't prove scientifically.
Like,
Well, like the belief that the universe is understandable in the first place, that our minds can grasp it, that knowledge is actually valuable.
those feel like foundational faiths almost.
Yeah.
Axioms you accept to even start doing science.
Pretty much. And Thiel worries that if science gets detached from some kind of ethical or philosophical grounding,
It could go wrong.
he uses the term Luciferian, suggesting a potential for knowledge pursued without wisdom or ethical constraint to become dangerous.
And they touch on that shifting historical blame game with Christianity and science, right?
Yeah, it's quite ironic. Early modern thinkers often blamed Christianity for holding back science.
Right. The Galileo story, etc.
But now, some contemporary critiques almost flip it, arguing that the Judeo-Christian idea of human dominion over nature is what started this whole potentially dangerous scientific project.
So damned if you do, damned if you don't.
As they say, Christianity always seems to get the blame somehow.
And this connects to another complex idea they bring in, mimetic desire, from René Girard.
Right. Girard's theory that we often desire things because other people desire them. We imitate each other's desires.
Leading to rivalry and competition.
Exactly. And Thiel suggests that as traditional social structures, hierarchies, maybe even shared religious beliefs weaken.
This mimetic rivalry might actually get worse, more intense.
Possibly. Without a shared sense of higher purpose, a transcendent goal, maybe we just end up competing more fiercely with each other over more immediate things.
So more freedom and less structure could paradoxically lead to more anxiety and conflict, less grand vision.
It's a complex, maybe unsettling thought about how societal dynamics might be shifting and contributing to this sense of drift or slowed progress in certain areas.
Okay, let's try to pull the main threads together.
Sounds good. So the core proposition is the significant slowdown in physical world progress since the mid-20th century.
Contrasted with the rapid progress in the digital world.
And the potential reasons floated include fear of technology's power, cultural turn inward, the allure of digital abstraction, the weight of bureaucracy.
Potential limits on scientific inquiry, maybe even these deeper shifts in cultural values and philosophical grounding.
Plus, those ideas about mimetic desire possibly intensifying in a less structured society.
Right. It's a rich mix of observations and potential explanation.
Absolutely.
And this is what the deep dive is all about, giving you a shortcut to understanding these complex conversations, pulling out the key takeaways and surprising insights. We've definitely covered some thought-provoking ground here.
For sure.
So here's the final thought we want to leave you with. Given everything we've discussed, this idea of slowed physical progress, the range of possible causes from fear and bureaucracy to cultural shifts and even mimetic theory, what do you think are the biggest factors driving the direction and the pace of progress today?
And maybe more importantly, what are the implications for our future? How do we strike that balance between pushing boundaries, upholding our values, and managing the risks that inevitably come with trying to change the world?
Definitely something to chew on.